Yeah, welcome, Raymond and Brian. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're currently working on and role briefly?
I'll let you start, Ray. Go.
I am a developer evangelist for Adobe as of about 6 months or so now. And my team focuses on document services, so working with PDFs and other documents.
Great.
And I'm a developer experience engineer at LaunchDarkly. I only started I guess this is now my 4th week, so relatively new at this. LaunchDarkly does feature management, like feature flags and things like that. So yeah, that's kind of my work is around trying to figure out how we can utilize these feature management tools inside of any number of different platforms, including Jamstack apps.
Oh, great. Brian, a question to you. I saw that you are a developer experience engineer. That's a kind of quite rare title, right? You see here quite often developer advocate, developer evangelist. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and in terms of like what do you do as an developer experience engineer compared to your previous roles as a developer advocate?
You know, it is a little bit different. At first, I thought it was kind of more of like just a title difference, but in reality, I am focused less. I think a developer advocate is a lot more focused on broad outreach efforts, like, you know, what we call like top of funnel kind of things, bringing in new audience and awareness of the product. That's not all of a developer advocate's job, obviously, but that is a big part of it. That the developer experience engineer role, at least as LaunchDarkly has defined it, doesn't have. I'm more focused on how can I build things with using our tools and help developers be able to get started using it. Like I just finished a whole thing on, if you want to use Next.js and you want to use LaunchDarkly, like here's a big demo on how to do all that integration, how to use it, and all the different modes that Next.js runs, like SSR, SSG, and so on. And then write up a guide on how to do that. So that's not really meant as like a broad outreach thing. It's more like somebody who's already using it, who wants to know how they can, you know, how we can make their experience learning the product easier. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if I understand right, it's more on a make you better onboarding, how you can reduce the friction of the developer who's trying to use your product. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Raymond, question to you. I think you are a senior developer evangelist at Adobe. Can you tell us like what's the biggest challenge being a senior developer evangelist at a bigger organization?
It is probably something that most people are familiar with, is making sure that there is making sure that people are on board with treating developer experience as part of the process. You know, getting past the idea of it works and getting to the point of where it works well and people actually want to use it. That there's definitely support for that, but we're definitely working to make it more part of the process, if that makes sense.
All right, yeah, makes sense. Can you tell me like why developer experience is important? Like what has been changed from past 10 years? If you look back, is there a more focus on companies seeing that the importance of developer experience in the past few years? Why it's important?
You know, I don't think that I think what's changed is not like, oh, suddenly a focus on developer experience in terms, it's more like developers have become more important. They've become an important, like they're an important consumer to a lot of companies nowadays. So I think, you know, the more that developers are involved in purchase decisions and things like that, the more the companies have to cater towards developers and improve their experience using the tools. And so I think it's just been a rise in the importance of the developer within an organization, to me, that's pushed this to the forefront. I don't know if you agree, Ray.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that, you know, it feels like this type of role has been around for a long time, but in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, it's definitely gotten a bit more formal. So we're having more discussions about like, how do you measure your job? How does an evangelist relate to an advocate versus a dev experience type person? What exactly are these people doing? It feels like it's gone from kind of a Wild West to a more formalized career.
Interesting. Brian, I think I really like your idea of thinking that it's more influence from product, more towards going towards like thinking about when you explain me, I was thinking about Headless and these Jamstack. Are there more tailored towards developers, like where it's not something like a WYSIWYG editor where a non-technical audience can get their job done? Like a lot of these, we are seeing more products which are headless, where you are more focused on developer-centric product. That's where you need more support, and that's where you need more kind of a developer experience. Similarly, how we used to think, or we still think about user experience. So we need to kind of make sure that we have a right onboarding for developer experience, and we make sure that we bring a great experience for developers in terms of adoption. What do you think about in terms of like why it's important for developer experience is such an important thing for company success?
For company what?
Company success, like if you want to be a developer focused product company success, how important it's the developer experiences?
I mean, I think if kind of using your example of headless stuff, the key thing in those is, though you can't have those without the integration. Like some developer can't, you can't just hand it off to some marketing department and hey, here, let's use Contentful or whatever headless CMS, you might want to use and just run with it. There's no way for that product to be successful in an organization without also onboarding the development team and getting them to do the integrations and things like that. So I think, when the more that we releasing products that kind of depend on developers to do that integration and to hook everything up and things like that, that's obviously you can't be successful as a product without getting them on board at that point. So I given your example, that would be kind of like my thinking on it. I don't know, Ray, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I'm definitely seeing a rise in the Jamstack area of things that support non-dev. So it's easier for marketing to see a preview online, for example. But all of those new things that make it better for non-devs still absolutely require the dev to help set it up and actually make it work.
Yeah, I think that's a nice take. My next question is on more towards that, like we are seeing a rise of no-code or low-code tools. Is that where we are going?
I don't think so. I mean, yes and no. Yes, I think they're going to continue to gain some traction. I think there's a lot that can be done with those tools. I think there's a limit to what can be done with those tools. So I particularly in the Jamstack, I would say no. I think, for Jamstack stuff, I still think it's going to be very developer focused. I think there is a kind of a segment of things you'll be able to build with those tools, but my own personal feeling is it's going to hit an upward limit of what you can do without being able to actually code. But maybe I'm just biased because I'm a coder.
Yeah, so I would add, I'm definitely seeing it growing. It kind of reminds me of when I first saw Jamstack. I was like, oh, I can use this everywhere. And then, okay, not everywhere, but it was incredibly compelling. I find even as a developer, I find some of the low code stuff pretty compelling. I think, like Brian said, it's going to hit a level where it will be very mature, but like it won't be going too far past that. I also think there's interesting comparisons out there. So like my first experience in that area was with Pipedream. And with Pipedream, even though you could bring all these kind of prepackaged stuff together, you're absolutely always writing a bit of code. And more recently, I've seen Power Automate, which is more, you can definitely do everything without code. So there's even in that space, there's different levels of no code, low code.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Interesting. What kind of trends you are seeing on the front end tooling chain, which trying to help enhance this developer experience? Are you seeing any trends and patterns where we are going towards in a front end tooling?
Interesting. I didn't. You could take a crack at that one first, Ray.
No, I won't take a crack at that. I mean,
Yeah.
so like being in this industry for a long time as a web developer, now is a great time. Like we have great tools everywhere. We have great front end frameworks everywhere. I don't know if in the last couple of years if there's been like a high level change. Like there's been new frameworks like Svelte, but we still have React, we still have Vue, we still have Angular, and we still have the tools that make those work. I'm not sure if there's been like a huge shift.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because that's what I was trying to think hard. I mean, and I'm thinking specifically in terms, there's a lot of trends right now. Like there's a lot of big trends, but I don't know on the front end side, I don't know if they're specifically focused on developer experience. I think like, I'm thinking of things like Astro, for instance, that's more about the end user experience and eliminating the need to dump so much JavaScript down. And Astro is just one of a handful of frameworks that seem to be headed towards that path of like, should we be sending for a simple application the entirety of React's JavaScript down the pipe? Is there a way to kind of hydrate things and only include JavaScript where necessary, et cetera, et cetera? Like those kind of things I think are big trends that I see happening right now, but that is not what I would call a developer experience trend. It's more of like an end user experience trend.
That's awesome, Brian.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brian. And also like, I'm looking into more on the kind of developer experience documentation, for example, Astro or React, the kind of developer experience documentation they're creating. They're focused on beginners and also more advanced user. And some of them might be wanted to do a step-by-step tutorial style. And some of them might be very comfortable watching a video, or somebody might be comfortable looking into playing it in action, like advanced example. I just fork it and play around with it and see it in action. I see more pattern in terms of different personas where they're trying to target, so that we are welcoming everyone to get a great onboarding of the tools like Astro, or it could be any other framework. This is one trend I'm seeing. For example, like Chakra design system, they got a great adoption. And one thing I was looking into that, why it has got so much of adoption. When I look into getting started guide, they got a different target. Like if you're using Next.js, you got how to start with Next.js. If you have a create React app, you got to create React app, how to get started with that, how to start with Gatsby. And if you're a kind of a person where you want to see it in action, like here is the video. Take a look at on YouTube video. So they got a bunch of flavors for all different kinds of users. So maybe that could be one onboarding experience which targets different user needs or our developer needs, where kind of having a smooth onboarding for all of them.
I would say like one thing I felt that was missing from that list, it's something that I've been like harping on for a long time, and Brian will recognize this, is that there's a lot of talks about these frameworks. I rarely hear somebody talk about, I have an HTML page that works well, but I need to add interactivity. I'm not going to drop a spa on that. I literally just need to add JavaScript. It may be a bit complex, but it's going to be one page. And I don't necessarily want to add a build process to an existing good site. I need this one page to be better in some way. I still feel like that's something that's not talked about. And I feel like there's millions of people who are not on Twitter, who are in the enterprise, who are doing these types of operations, who still need that help. And it kind of goes back into where I see a lot of beginner tutorials. I see a lot of advanced tutorials. It's rare to see I kind of know what I'm doing. I need to get a bit better. Help me get to that second level.
Brian, any thoughts on that? Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that with your take that, I've seen the projects that have been successful lately do seem to really have put a lot of effort into the experience of onboarding people. And so, So yeah, and also taking into account multiple learning paths and things like that, having, even things like online, editors where I can try things out without even installing anything. I mean, that's a common pattern right now in onboarding. Is like, don't even make me have to run through npm install or whatever. Just let me try it out online and see how it works. So, and I'm really glad about that. I think it does set a high bar for new projects, but because, as developers, building the project is always like super exciting. And it's like, okay, now you got to document. It's like, oh, okay. But I think it's great because we need that kind of thing. I think, we went through a period, I think, where I felt like a long time where a lot of projects came out and you were kind of left on your own. Um, the documentation was kind of weak. It might be a good, like, hello world, and then it was like, okay, go.
Yeah. Good luck.
But it feels like there's been a number of projects that have raised the bar a bit. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of speculating here. Part of that I feel is there's been a rise in these in projects that have become businesses. Like they get funding in some kind of way. They're not like just somebody's little repo on this that they're playing with on the side. They've turned them into legit, like whether they're not for profit or not, they've become some kind of legitimate business. And so I think they've kind of started to raise the bar, and everybody else has to try and keep up if you want your project to fit in.
Great. Do you have any example, like you have worked with any products or which you have consumed any products which has a greater developer experience? It could be documentation, it could be the way they onboard. Do you have any takeaways from such products?
I have one.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, I have not been a React fan just because it just didn't feel like it clicked well with me. And I had to look at not Nux, because Nux is the Vue one. Next. It's Next. Yeah. So I had to look at it for something at work, and their onboarding was so incredibly well done. It had me completely reconsidering React as well. Like, using it via their system and their docs was just like perfect. I mean, enough to like completely change my mind on React. Not that I've had time to learn React yet, but I've gone from like, that's fine, I'll stick with Vue, to I absolutely need to take a look at React now.
I would agree with Ray that Next has a good onboarding experience. It was one that, even in prior jobs when we were like, okay, how do we develop our documentation and our guides and stuff like that, we used as one of the examples of a good one. I'm trying to remember who else. I think it was Twilio had a great experience as well that we tried to emulate. Those are the ones that come right to mind as ones we took as like, okay, let's try and figure out what was successful here, and replicate that in our own products. But I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing, like definitely one of the standard, like a lot of people refer is Stripe documentation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And also, I was also playing around with Algolia, and also Algolia has a great documentation.
Yeah, I was just about to, when you brought up Stripe, I was remembering Algolia was one we copied as in fact, I would say when I did my stuff, I liked Algolia's enough that I kind of stuck to their model more than say some of the others. I thought their documentation was great, the way they segregated their content and made a lot of sense. But I tell you what, it also helps that the product's really easy to use. I think it does exactly what they advertise. It's like, I've never run into like where I'm like, this is really excruciatingly difficult. Like, no onboarding experience is gonna cover up for a bad product, right? So the fact is, like, I think in each of those examples, these are also very good products, right? So whether it's an open source framework like Next or paid products like Algolia and Twilio, I mean, they're very good products, and the onboarding experience only kind of highlights that. So I'm not to discount their onboarding experience, but like, you can't do that without having a great experience in general, like, having the product be easy to use and deliver on its promises.
That's a really valid point. I had a similar conversation when I used to work at Commerce Tools, where we were talking about like the documentation should be a best practice, where we don't want to hit a lot of extensive API calls to our cloud service so that we get down or we get a lot of traffic, and it has to be optimized and it has to be used in the right way. So the documentation examples should be kind of a best practices, and also developer beginner friendly, so that they can also able to digest that and also provide examples which are kind of a best practices, the best way to use their product. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, my next question is more towards what's kind of your advice if somebody of a new product team wanted to start focusing on developer experience? Do you have any advices to consider if they kickstart some product and focus on like, hey, we want to provide a greater developer experience? Do you want to provide some tips or advice based on your experience?
Ray, thoughts? I'm thinking.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, this is like my entire job. So I'm trying to compress my entire role into like 1 or 2 sentences. A lot of it, I think, comes from trying to get the mindset of someone who's not known your product. So engineers, you're using it 24/7. And if you really have to work at, I'm coming at this from day 0, I don't have any of the dependencies installed, I know nothing. How much hassle do I have to go to get the result of your product? And if you can think in that perspective, you may find things that you could minimize or reduce the headaches to actually get there. Even if your product is working as is right now, if you kind of take that mindset, you can make it work better, make developers more excited about actually using it. Something that I've seen in like all my history, like before I was doing Jamstack, I was doing application servers, and even back then, there were options, right? I could do the same web app in Cold Fusion, PHP, .NET, whatever. At the end of the day, the product / platform / language that I'm actually excited to work with, that won't be a pain in the butt, is the one I'm going to pick, even though all those accomplish the exact same thing.
Yeah, I think Ray has a really good point. One of the things I've seen, particularly when people are creating, like you'll see it a lot in startups, is that the initial documentation and onboarding experience is written by either one of the founders or the engineering team, and it really doesn't take that perspective of somebody who comes in there not knowing anything about your product, or it makes a ton of assumptions about what a developer already knows when they come in. It doesn't explain simple concepts or terminology, that it just kind of assumes everybody knows this. I even had discussions like that at companies I work, where it's like, oh, but everybody knows that already. And I'm like, no, they don't. So I think that's really important. And that's actually a good point Ray makes, in that one of the things I think a good developer advocate can bring, or a developer experience engineer to a company, is that perspective of like somebody who looking at it from like, I'm new to the product, I'm new to maybe the whole experience, and trying to figure out what pieces are missing to make this experience smooth.
Great. Yeah, I really like it. From my experience, being more a product manager, always looking from a developer perspective. One thing I figured out that I do a lot of user interviews and run some surveys to get more information. What was more effective for me was more doing a pair programming, because some of the answers, when you talk to developer, they say, hey, it's not a problem, we do it in this way. But when you try to do a pair programming with the developer, you see all the crisscross they're trying to do, what errors they find, get stuck, how they try to solve it today. which they don't say when you're doing user interview, or they don't say in your survey, like, because it's straightforward for them. Like they're so much used to it. You miss out the important information, like what's the journey looks like for them. Have you seen such pattern or trends, like you try to do pair programming with developer, like where you get more insights? What's your take on that?
I would say I agree with you. I think user interviews, while important, have often ended up being there's a tendency on the part of the participant to help to validate whatever, like they they don't want to tell you, generally speaking, they don't want to tell you your product has problems, or like they don't want to get into those are difficult conversations to have, and uncomfortable, right? So I think they often will, if you do those user interviews, you really have to dig to try and get at that information. Oftentimes, when I participate in these, it's like, okay, well, we came out with everybody saying everything was great, but now nobody's using the product. And why is that? Like, if everything's so wonderful, why is, but it's partly because you'll get the information kind of validation you seek, but you won't get the information you need. So I think, yeah, absolutely. Working one-on-one with programmers and watching them code will definitely give you more insight, because they're not there to just validate you at that point. You're just kind of observing, right?
Well, Raymond, do you have any thoughts on that?
I haven't ever participated in one where we were the ones going out. I've definitely been on the other side, and I have no problem saying when I think something doesn't work.
I can attest to that Ray does.
Or if I see something that I think will confuse others. But yeah, no, if I were to give a interview like that, I would be concerned as well that you won't get necessarily honest feedback.
Yeah, makes sense. My last question is, what are some of the resources or blogs or authors you follow or recommend following to get up to date with the developer experience? I know Brian has a great newsletter, Jamstack. I'm one of the fan. So to get more content around Jamstack, do you have any blogs or podcasts or authors you recommend to follow just to get or stay up to date on the information on developer experience?
Oh God, I follow a ton of blogs. I'm trying to think. I mean, I think a lot of the ones that I recommend as like favorites would be ones folks probably are aware of. Like CSS Tricks still keeps up like very, very high level of developer content. I really love that site. Smashing Magazine as well has consistently good content. But Ray has a great site too, by the way. Ray's blog, I follow a lot on his blog, and he's one of the more, like, unlike some other people like myself who can't keep their blog up. Ray continues to produce like high quality content. What now? What has it been, Ray? 15 years you've been writing on that thing?
Too long.
Too long. So, I think those are all really great resources. I have like a list of blogs I follow. I also follow like dev.to, but I mean, it's a lot of noise. So I don't necessarily recommend anybody follow that RSS feed or anything, because there's a lot of posts there, but there is good stuff there as well. So I join the community. I wouldn't necessarily follow each and every article. So
I would add, I mean, in terms of just general technology, you mentioned the Jamstack newsletter, all of the Cooper Press stuff, they have a front end one, they have a mobile one. You find the topics that you care about, you sign up, and what's great about it is that it drops in your inbox if you don't have time and just don't look at it. So unlike Twitter, which is constantly in your face and more of an annoyance than anything else, I find email newsletters to be a much more relaxing, passive way to keep up. Specifically for like developer evangelism or efficacy or whatever, there's no one in particular I follow in regards to that, because a lot of people I follow are in the same role. So there'll be times when I'll see someone post something or I'll see them do a talk, and I don't necessarily care about the content, but I want to see how they present it. I want to kind of sit in the audience and critique how they're breaking the subject down, even like how they're doing their slides. That's one thing I miss about in-person conferences, is that was a great way for me to kind of hone my craft by looking at other speakers.
On that note, speaking of weekly newsletters, so there is a DevRel weekly that has a lot of stuff on that kind of. So
That's not Cooper Press, right?
No, it's not Cooper Press. No, there's a couple of DevRel newsletters, but I know that one is really good.
Well, which one? The developer avocado?
I follow that one as well. No, but personally, and it's the one I like better is called DevRel Weekly.
Okay.
Don't think I'm on that one.
So it's Mary Grace who wrote a really good book about DevRel. She's the one who kind of maintains that newsletter. So I think it's quite good. Yeah.
Do you have any recommendation? Like I should speak to any other developer relation or developer advocates? Like I should interview just to get more thoughts on the developer experience. Do you have any recommendation?
Jen Looper.
Okay, Jen's great. Yeah, Jen Looper. I mean, I don't know if you've talked to the folks at Netlify, like Cassidy or
No, not that.
Yeah, or Jason. They're both excellent. Oh man, I've got a long list because I run on the side that that CFE.dev site, and so I get a lot of really great speakers. If you want to speak to, and a lot of them are developer advocates. So I mean, I could give you a long list of ones that I thought were fabulous. So yeah, but offhand, those would be the names I think of.
Oh, okay, that's great. Yeah, any final thoughts or any kind of advice or any kind of final impressions on developer experience you would like to share?
I guess because we didn't really talk too much about Jamstack specifically, but I think, it is interesting, I think, to watch the developer experience improve in the Jamstack, because it started out as tools that were very, very raw, like command line based tools, and we've now started to build up where there's a lot more. The onboarding is smoother, not just for developers, but also on some of these services and things like that. It's easier integration. So it's interesting for me to watch as these things kind of come together. Even tools start to kind of consolidate where now you even have tools that aggregate other tools into the, like bring multiple APIs into a single service and things like that, right? Like so it's just kind of interesting to watch how the space evolves around improving that experience.
Do you have any specific tool you are trying to following, especially this schema stitching or data aggregators?
Well, I worked for a little while, like for StepSend, and they did the schema stitching stuff there. So obviously that may be partly why I got interested. It's good. What is it they say? Like, yeah, it's about, can't change somebody's mind who's paid to, whose salary depends on it. But anyway, but yeah, so StepSend does that, and Take Shape is also doing some stuff around that. But even totally blanking on the framework for building GraphQL APIs.
Apollo.
Even Apollo is starting to kind of get into this space a little bit with federation and things like that. So, but I think it's not just those pieces, not just specifically like GraphQL APIs and schema stitching. It's just, I think one of the things that became difficult in Jamstack is that there were so many different things we had to integrate. Right? There's so many different pieces we have to bring together. And so it got to be kind of complicated to do all these things. And now you're starting to see even some of the platforms kind of building some tooling so that I don't have to integrate all these different services. Like, now I can do a lot of things on Netlify that I often had to go into separate services before, right? So I think partly because it's trying to reduce that complexity, that it, made it kind of difficult to build these apps before, but now it's gotten easier.
Brian, I got one more question, depending on the answer. Do you see this trend that the front end is getting complex because of Jamstack, just like how you described that you have to hook a lot of APIs, you have to handle, it could be Stripe, it could be some other e-commerce API. You get a Jamstack, yes, but it's on the job of front-end dev to figure it out and make sure that it works smoother. Compared to previously, it more on a monolithic, it was more at the back-end engineer's hand to figure out things, but now everything is on the, is the front end getting more complicated?
Yes, absolutely getting more complicated. I think even as an example, there's now a common pattern called the backend for front end, BFF pattern, right? Which is basically like, it's the front end developers doing stuff that used to be kind of solely the domain of the back end developers, where like, okay, now I'm massaging data and getting it all and stitching it together and then getting it ready to be consumed by whatever UI, right? And all of that used to be purely like, oh, this API isn't returning things the way I need them. Let me send a message over to the backend developers like, hey, we need this change so that it does it this way, kind of thing. And it wasn't the domain of the front end developer. But now we've started to kind of move a lot of that onto the front end, where you could honestly be a front end developer and really not know how to style. I suck at CSS, and I consider myself a front end developer. So like I think because you spend a lot of time working in services, and front end developers are now expected oftentimes to write the like serverless functions and things like that. I mean, like these are the domain of the front end developer has kind of expanded, right? Or if you're using a tool like Next.js, you're basically building the back end and the front end all in front end tooling. So that was a long way of saying, yes, absolutely, it's gotten more complicated.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Raymond, any thoughts, final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that it's complicated, but I always like to put an and to that as well. And that as an industry, we have a lot more power than what we used to have. So like, I feel like when I started, it was horse and carriage, or maybe even just horse. And now we have like a car, and a car is significantly more complex than a horse, but it's also a lot more powerful, and you can get a lot more done. So I acknowledge that it's kind of harder to start on day zero with zero knowledge and build a web page in 2 hours. That's harder to do, but I have a huge amount of appreciation for the platform as a whole, in terms of how much browsers have matured, how much HTML and JavaScript and all that. All of my tools have gotten significantly better for me. So I try to focus more on the fact that things are a lot better than how they were when I started off writing Perl CGI scripts and not having any dev tools at all.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I would agree with that. We can definitely do more, but there is a big burden on being a front end dev nowadays.
Yeah, and also like Gitpod and the code spaces and StackBlitz, they run your npm instances on the browser itself. That's creating really a lot more interesting. The development, like Ray said, the browsers are getting mature and more capable, and the advancement of Jamstack. It's really interesting to see where the trend is going. Yeah, thank you very much, and I really enjoyed the conversation with you. It was great. Yeah, looking forward for our meetup in next month. Any thoughts or any questions?
No, this was great. Thank you, Anil.
Stay safe out there.
Thank you. You too. Have a nice day. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.